Okay, thank you everybody for joining and welcome to this edition of Propmodo Conference Calls. My name is Franco. I am the co-founder and editor of Propmodo. We talk about the innovations and technologies that are changing the built world, and today I am lucky enough to be joined by Greg Gammil. He is Portfolio Optimization Manager at Regions Bank. Go ahead and say hi, Greg.
Hello, how are y'all?
So I was lucky enough to be able to interview Greg about some really great work he has been doing with Regions Bank. He's been there for a while and obviously seen a lot, and so his experience, and particularly one recent experience, really opened up a lot of eyes, I think, for our readers. So we're happy to have you back here, Greg, so I can pick your brain a little bit more. Thank you for joining us.
Absolutely.
Maybe you could just give me a little background on yourself, your organization, and what you do there at Regions Bank, or at least what you think you do there.
Yeah, absolutely. So I work for Regions Bank. It's a top 500 company, financial institution. We're in 15 states across the Southeast. Hopefully some of y'all have heard of us and or have relationships with us. But I joined the bank in 2007, and I'm lucky enough to have been hired in a similar role as a planner many years ago, and have been in this same type of role for all those years. So I didn't move in a real estate group and then get moved over into the planning side or anything like that. I've been here since the beginning. In fact, when I started in 2007, we did not even have a number of the properties within our drawn repository, much less within a CAFM system. So we have really come light years in terms of our documentation, our knowledge of where we have space and seats from a drawing standpoint and as a record standpoint, and now with a lot more of the data from a seat occupancy information perspective as well.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. The whole idea of what an office manager is, what these kind of roles that are played by corporate occupiers is, I think, a lot less about just kind of managing the day-to-day, and it has become a lot greater piece of the planning. So, I think that's something we've seen across the industry, and Greg, maybe you could kind of weigh in a little bit. When you think about what it is that you do, like what are your metrics for success? Like what are you really trying to optimize?
Well, strictly speaking, we were given a challenge on square foot reduction, and so we were looking at square foot per FTE. When we compared ourselves to a peer average, we were very high, and so as we all understand the cost of square footage in today's environment, our goal, and my goal specifically, is to shed square footage and or look at the space that associates are using and maximize that square footage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that was
my
something.
goal, my success is based on square footage per associate.
Yeah, and I kind of have a hunch that this is one of the reasons that you were able to glean so many insights, is that you went into this with a very kind of clear understanding of what it was you were doing, and that hypothesis, I think really generated some good results. So, as you were kind of thinking about how to reduce square footage, what did you kind of see as your blind spots? What were some things that you needed to know before you could really make any big decisions?
Well, I'll tell you, our biggest blind spot really was the approval process in order to do this. I think we all understood from a large-scale perspective the benefits of, if we can identify X, then we can see Y. The problem was getting executive approval to spend the money to get this information. Once we finally got it, it was much easier to go the next process or the next step. But there was a tremendous amount of pushback in, why do you need this data? What's it going to show? Who's it going to affect? And then I think there was a sneaky suspicion that they all understood, if you're able to show what you think you're going to be able to show, how is that going to affect me and my group?
Yeah, there's got to be some thinking like that, about from kind of the day-to-day managers. So what exactly were you proposing, and what did you hope to find with it?
Well, we searched for many, many years in terms of understanding what is out there. Desk beacons, card access, where you sit down at a desk and you put your badge on it, and then it turned open the system to your associate ID. Or we went through many, many things. A lot of furniture companies had sensors built in, but we were trying to understand, and from a bang for the buck perspective, how that particular seat is being used. Not how, but how often it is being used. And we wanted to try to make it as anonymous as possible, because we did have a huge big brother is watching you to overcome. And so that was one of the things that drew us toward these occupancy sensors, is we were able to do this from a very anonymous basis. We know that seat 123 is occupied 15% of the day. It doesn't say who it is. It doesn't say what they were doing. It just says we know the occupancy within this particular location for said seat, and that's given us a tremendous amount of insight.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so obviously you had to do a lot of internal kind of meetings to support this, but obviously you needed to find the right technology that would kind of give you this anonymous insight, but still have it be robust enough to give you some answers. So I know that you, after your search, you reached out to Tapdn to create these sensors, and can you maybe describe exactly what they look like, what they are, and what they do?
Yeah, the Tapdn sensors are really just the size of maybe an electrical gang box. They have a small eye, if you will, that kind of sticks out. I understand that they've moved on to a new generation that's even more seamless now. But these particular devices basically were affixed to underneath the desk. They have a reading radius of a couple of feet outside, maybe as many as 5 or 6 feet outside the desk, so that when somebody sits down, they just see movement. And I think one of the things that we really had to do was, from the get-go, when we got buy-in from HR to say, okay, we understand what you're doing, we understand it's not going to be associate-specific, name-specific, we sat down with each group and we pulled out the sensors and we handed it to them and said, when you drop your pencil and you look up on your desk, this is what you're going to see. It is not a camera. It is not something that we can see, X, Y, Z. All it does is pick up movement. And so we did not want to surprise them by one day just having something under their desk and them not knowing what was going on. We were very upfront with them and very honest with them, and have relayed the information to the executives to say, you know what, here's the information that we found out. Thank y'all for your participation. That information, by the way, has become very instrumental in planned growth and what the market is doing and how they're foreseeing space acquisitions within specific buildings and or floors.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things I thought was so interesting about this was that you had taken the time to kind of go through and ask managers. I think this might have been some of the pushback, is managers probably already thought, well, I know how much my workforce is at their desks. We're there, we see them. So what was the kind of average answer for when you polled people of how much they thought people were actually at their desks?
Yeah, very much so. Every manager, we said, if you have 10 people, how many are there in the office, a day? And they would always say, oh, it's 8 or 9. And how often are they there? Oh, they're there, probably 70% of the time. They'll get up and go to a meeting and come back. But the reality of the occupancy of said desk even surprised us. It was much less than what we had even prepared ourselves from an occupancy perspective.
And so, when you went back to these managers with this, what did they say? Did they get more on board, or was there some pushback?
Well, first and foremost, I didn't believe the numbers when I saw them. And so we went back and we did, once again, more site, walkthroughs and making sure that what people saw actually was being recorded correctly. And once we understood, look, these sensors are doing exactly what they're saying they would do, we went back to them and simply said, look, this is what it is. And if you're honest with yourselves, watch your team for the next week. And we've had a couple of a couple of executives who watched associates and were very diligent in that. And they said, I would not believe it if you didn't call it to my attention, but you're right. And the next question that we usually ask is, did you see a downside in your productivity or your numbers? And they didn't even realize they were working in this particular fashion to the point that they were, and they were still meeting their goals and production standards.
Mm-hmm. And so, obviously, this is a very easy lesson to learn. But I mean, what do you do with that now? Like, how has this affected the way that you think about space or the way you plan, new offices that come online?
Well, I think, to be completely honest, people are in their seats even less than what we believed or wanted to accept. I think from the study, understanding your teammates, being HR, IT, and properties as a three-headed group to help implement and get this out there is 100% a must. In terms of what we're doing with this information, we've changed the way that we design floor plans. In fact, during the middle of our study that we did these sensors within Charlotte, I let these results become known to my boss and our design team, and we immediately changed how we were looking at some future projects in terms of the number and style of the seats that we were implementing, in terms of conference rooms, more 6 and 8 person conference rooms, less 16-person conference rooms. And so it has had an immediate effect. We also realized that with this occupancy being much less than what was originally thought, you don't need as much square footage. And so we're able to work with our transaction management team and shed square footage that we may have renewed 2 years ago, but in today's standards, we understand, look, the associates may be assigned to this building, but they're not showing up but 50% of the time or 75% of the time, and they don't need 45 seats, they only need 20 seats. And so it's been a very positive outcome from that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just got one of our listeners reached out with a question, and they're interested in how do you kind of pair this pure kind of occupancy, who's in the seats data with kind of other maybe human observation parameters even. How long are people on their laptops, or how much of the time are they on their phone? Do you have any sense of how to kind of parse these two data sets together?
We have not looked at what an associate is doing at the desk. We have only the understanding that they are at a particular desk. We don't know if they're on the phone. We don't know if they're on the computer. We don't know if they're leaned back talking to an associate, 2 cubes over. We just know that there is somebody sitting at that desk. That was one of the hurdles that we had to make sure that HR and the associates understood, in that this was going to be going on, and we did not know what they were doing. We just wanted to see how often that particular seat was occupied. And I think that helped ease the big brother mentality. We can marry up based on our floor plan repository. We have approximately 80% of all of our sites within our CAFM system, and we have a very good idea of where people are sitting. But once again, only that person is assigned to said seat, not that they're actually sitting there all the time.
Yeah, I think that was an important takeaway. I think it's too easy to kind of say, well, look at all these great technologies out there and look at how much can be understood about space usage, but sometimes that misses the human element, right? You actually have people who very well, and maybe rightfully so, kind of, don't really like the idea of their boss, knowing when they're in the bathroom, when they're on a phone call. And so, now that you've kind of started with this, at least having this kind of base metrics, what do you think you'll build on top of this? What are some other things that you think in the future you kind of like to get a better understanding of?
Well, 100% how conference rooms and meeting rooms are being used. We exist on a floor today that has, counting in my head, 6 conference rooms, of which the smallest is an 8-person conference room, the largest being 2 16-person conference rooms that can be opened up to have a large assembly room. Well, the fact of the matter is I'm sitting in one of the 16-person conference rooms now. It's just a horrible waste of square footage. The new floor plans, as I said, when we came back and we 180'd our design, the floor that is below us and is going to is being redone has approximately 18 conference rooms on the floor, ranging in size from 4 to 8 to 16, but there's many less 16-person conference rooms. But we do want to understand how these rooms are being used on a day-to-day basis. So I think occupancy sensors that count associates as you walk through a door, or you're sitting at a conference room and it is able to recognize how many people are in a room. I think that's the next bastion of data mining that we're going to pursue.
Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of office managers think that they can use maybe who's scheduled to be at conferences, or conference scheduling apps as a proxy for occupancy. But as we talked about, you don't really think that's a very good representation, correct?
Well, I think what we found, and we use Outlook at our company, you may invite 25 people to a meeting, but in reality, there are 4 people in the office, 2 people have canceled, and the rest are calling in and listening on a conference call. So, if there's a better way to track that occupancy, understand, the actual use that is needed, I think that starts to answer that next layer of square footage requirements.
Mm-hmm. And I think this also spills over, obviously, into flex space, right? This is space that doesn't have, scheduling apps or have anything. I mean, do you also plan on doing some similar occupancy stuff with all these new flex conference areas, casual conference areas that you're putting in?
Well, not only flex from a conferencing standpoint, but from a seat use going forward, we have started to unveil a program called Greenworks at Regions, and part of that is very much centralized on the flex associate, and we're trying to get a handle on exactly how many people are involved in this. Once again, the occupancy information plays a pivotal role, because a lot of managers say we just can't work in this environment, and then all of a sudden you unveil, well, this is what we've tracked for your group for the last 6 months, and 70% of your associates are already working 1 or more days in this environment. It's something that executives are learning to deal with, learning to become better managers of associates who are not in the office 24/7, and how to work in this new environment, this new IT environment that we live in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, and kind of looking forward, what do you think are the next levels? Obviously, the occupancy is one, but how are you kind of looking at adopting new technology and kind of new ideas to keep progressing this and keep having a better understanding of your space?
I think the BLE, the IP address of where people are using their computers, whether or not it's within a business that is, a building that is their business, or if it's outside at a Starbucks or a department, store or something, that type of information is going to play more and more of a role. We're looking at that and trying to work with our IT brethren to see, okay, what do you have that is readily available that we just haven't looked at on a day-to-day basis. But I think you can't get away from the actual butts and seats and how often somebody is here based on these sensors. I think the sensors that we have, and whether or not it's a badge sensor when you walk into a room, or at a particular seat that they have to recognize that somebody is there. I don't think that information is ever going to become irrelevant. I think it's always going to be very relevant to where people can associate a desk being occupied by somebody at some particular time.
Yeah, and one of the things I thought was so great about this kind of case study that you brought to us was, I think so much gets talked about, kind of tech offices and these really progressive, you imagine the white walls and the slides and the ping pong tables, but these are banks, right? This is something that is a lot of work that requires just being at a desk to do. And even still, it looks like there's a lot of room for things like hot desks and flexible seating and flexible conferencing. So what do you kind of think are ways that the industry is changing the way they think about office space? Even something as kind of the old and slow moving as the financial services.
Yeah, I think in a bank where you have so many different assets of how people work, you do have the old school mentality of a banker, yet you also have the companies like a Rocket Mortgage where they're very progressive and their headquarters are exactly what you said, ping pong tables and yoga studios and all this kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. So the fintechs are all out there and they're flashy and they're sexy, but they're still doing financial work. So somebody has figured out that you don't have to be, a stodgy old guy with a cigar sitting in a corner office and can still make money. So I think that's our challenge, is to understand and let the associates and executives know we can all still work in this environment, be very productive, and still do a very good performance and do a good job.
Yeah, and I know the impetus for a lot of these tech companies to spend all this money, understanding and designing space, is a lot of it has to do with kind of talent acquisition, right? They're in a war for talent. Do you kind of see that same mentality coming into more traditional services like finance?
Very much so. In fact, on a project that we did in Fort Worth, which was really our first foray into this new workplace standard that we have, the market executive had a cow when he saw what we were going to do, and he said, how in the world am I going to sell this to my bankers? And his boss was keen enough to say, your bankers are here because of what they've done for the past, but we're planning for the future. And after the area was built out and they moved in, that boss that I was working with called me and he said, I've actually had 3 people from another location call to see if they can office here because they like this environment so much better. It's just different. It takes time. The staunchest proponents in Charlotte, when we rolled this out, not only from the workplace standard, but from the occupancy sensor, have come up and they said, this is a much better environment. Never did I talk to so many people on my team. We're always being collaborative. We're moving around, and we don't, as your sensors show, we don't need some of the seats that we have. So, people start to understand what we're doing, although they may not readily come out and lovingly request it. I will say one of your questions that I saw earlier was, how do you know if it's been a success or not? And I think the biggest thing that I can say is, when my boss gets mad at me for not having a building with the sensors in it, why don't we have occupancy information in said building? I know that I've hit something that is now important to him to see. As such, his anger with me that I can't give him, well, the occupancy in this building is 72%. And so when he says, well, we need to get that remedied, then I know that I've won him over to understanding the data.
Yeah, I'm sure once you've had access to that kind of information, it kind of feels like you're flying blind if you don't have it. But I got another question from a listener, and it's basically about your kind of how you looked at these sensors. It says so many different sensors on the market. What do you use to choose the right one? What are your considerations when choosing?
Well, as this was our first foray, I had to make sure it was bang for the buck. And there are a lot of different sensors out there, but the sensor from Tapdn was a very economical sensor. The reporting structure that came with said sensor and the ability to grow far outweighed any of the other sensors that we happen to see. And I think that we're able to add on to that and really grow this into a robust system that, once again, all I have to do is pull up this site and show my executive, and he just shakes his head and says, I can't believe we have all that square footage there still. So,
yeah, I mean, speaking of scalability, how much do you think you can scale these sensors, in the near future here? How much of your portfolio are you looking to deploy this?
We're doing a large move from one building into 4 of our other buildings, and the new floors that we're developing for these reload associates. We're putting these sensors in, and we'll leave them there. We're working with the team to see if there's a possibility that we have them there for 6 months and then move them to another floor, or whether or not we just keep them there and just see how they work on a day-to-day basis. But yes, very much from a go-forward basis, they are playing a role in our future plans.
Yeah, and I mean, we see this a lot too, where it's slow. The pilot is hard to get, the green light for, but once it happens and something comes from it, being able to know that you can scale these things is obviously a big part for a organization as big as yours. And
I think one of the things that really has to be hammered is to understand the economic impact of what you can find. These sensors aren't free, of course, and I'm not, saying that they were the most expensive things on the market, but you always want to get bang for the buck. And I think when you are able to pay an amount of money, and then you can show within a year or so, you can save 4 times that in square footage cost by not renewing something, it starts to play a huge role in the decision process going forward. So I think it's understandable for the apprehension on saying, I've got to pay how much for what am I getting from an executive perspective. But when you fast forward 3 years and they understand, why don't we have these sensors at another place, and or we're not going to renew that lease for 25,000 square feet for the next 10 years, it certainly pays economic dividends.
Right, and that's just on a pure economic level, right? That ignores kind of the other halo effects around it, right? Like hopefully more productivity from your workers, or being able to attract better workers with better space. So, even just the economics of it pencil out. So that obviously makes it a little bit easier to sell. But but before we leave, I think we've got some really great stuff. I am kind of interested to hear, what you think, what would be on your wish list if there was something that you could really, if technology and office politics weren't a thing, what would you love to be able to analyze in the office, and what would you do with that information?
Good grief, that's a loaded question, isn't it?
That's why I left it for last.
Absolutely. I think somebody had asked earlier, what people are doing. I certainly wouldn't want to see my productivity numbers when I'm at my desk working, because I'm certainly one to certainly look at, if I get bored on a project, I'll go off and look at the internet, or check my football team out or whatever. But to understand the general productivity of how people are when they're in the office or out of the office, I think would be important to understand just how much money we're spending for technology and comforts within the office, as opposed to just allowing somebody to work remote and give them a laptop to work out of their home or their Starbucks or at the beach with the ocean coming in on them. Are we spending more money than is necessary within the office, and they're not as productive, or maybe they are more productive? But that's one of the things that I'd like to try to get a better handle. I don't think that we have a very good handle on, even with everything we've done, that a group can say they're more productive or less productive. It's a very hard number to identify going forward or previous.
Yeah, that's a tough thing to kind of define what that means. But obviously, as more systems get integrated, obviously workplace analytics and digital products can kind of also tell you quite a bit about when and how they're being used. So that could be on the horizon, although it might be the distant one.
Right. It's a lot more Big Brother.
Yeah, right. And then we also have to make sure that people don't get that icky feeling when they think about everything they're doing being tracked. So that's the human element. So, well, great. Thank you so much, Greg. I really appreciate your time and all of our callers' time. So I want to wrap things up there. Thank you, everybody, for listening to the Propmodo conference call, and we will talk to you again next time. Thank you.